In the southern seas of Alaxia, 3,000 years ago, God fell from the heavens. With him came enlightenment, and by his blessing was the greatest empire of the elder days forged, Anternia. The god that fell from the sky, Luca, would lend his name to hundreds of cities and towns, but only one would rise to true prominence and become the future imperial capital. Lukero is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Historians place the oldest settlement back over 3,000 years to 482 BX, when pastoralist Anter people established a fortified trade hub atop a hill near the Madalena River. Quickly though, trade would bring wars over resources and passage, and threats from neighboring cities would demand an organized military. This led to a body known as the Arms Assembly to become the first government in the city outside the priesthood. A council composed of commanders called Nameinnprogress, officers who led formations known as Cartography, both in defense and attack. But military rule led quickly to disagreements between wealthy merchant dynasties and military leadership, escalating tensions between the two classes until the formation of the Great Assembly in 312 BX. The Great Assembly would take over the Arms Assembly in all civil affairs, from public works to trade, leaving the Arms Assembly to handle only matters of war. So arose the five-class society of Lukero. The Nameinnprogress ruling in the Arms Assembly and commanding the military, the Rawdkyegya ruling in the Great Assembly, the Maiorist administering the Great Temples, the Veriko comprising the bulk of the population, and finally the Putzikasi, Irgawa prisoners captured during wartime and forced to serve as laborers and servants. As time passed, Lukeroan fascination with Turbinian culture grew beyond simply adopting their government. Lukero took also the arts of poetry, song, philosophy, and even the systems of inheritance and blood. The classical philosopher Neta Lakares put it bluntly in his famous quote,
"The Anta of Lukero is to the Turbinian what the bee is to its nectar."
The city continued to grow and develop, and continued to make stronger and stronger trade connections. Most of the merchant dynasties came to speak as readily in Turbinian as Anternian, making the city a perfect hub for foreign merchants. But Lukero's economic, cultural, and military growth would not go unenvied. Her neighbors, the city-states of Maior and Larata, would lead a coalition against Lukero, armies marching on the holy city from both east and west. The invasion began months after a man named Rikar's ascension to Oikia, the head of the assembly. Lukero's enemy believed the young and inexperienced ruler would be unable to unify the factions of the Arms Assembly to mount a united defense on two fronts. They could not have been more wrong.
Friends, Anternians, countrymen, today the barbarians, the savages of Maior, the thieving scoundrels of Larata, whatever godless heathen rabbles pass for armies in those lands, march for us. They think us weak, they think us backwards, while they wallow in their filth and partake in rituals which would make a Zagorian shudder. Ha! We will show them who are chosen by the divine. We will show them what civilization looks like, and it will be the last thing their barbarian eyes ever see.
The battle was swift. The Lukeroans defeated the Mainoran army almost entirely, cavalry cutting down hundreds as they fled the fields and capturing almost 1,000 prisoners. Rikar then rode across the plain, meeting with the Second Army as the battle was already underway, taking to the thickest fighting to inspire the men. His counselors advised against the risk, but the general is said to have retorted,
"With fate at my back, there are no risks."
Whether Rikar's belief was true or not, the battle was soon won. Unsatisfied with merely a successful defense, the war continued, with a series of battles as the Lukeran army fought their way to capturing the cities of Larata and Maior themselves. In the aftermath, Rikar had developed a taste for conquest. He was not content merely to secure his people's borders, nor to stop with the gains already made. He craved more, but the Senate was not so bloodthirsty. They were concerned. The Lukeroans had won, sure, but with heavy casualties. The generals in the assembly couldn't deny Rikar's charisma, but some openly questioned his tactical mind. The Senate convened and voted overwhelmingly to secure what they had, developing roads, expanding the fleets, and taking other measures to both easily put down internal rebellion and defend against potential aggression from the southern kingdom of Terbinia. As Lucaro's influence expanded under Rikar's continued conquests, the Republic of Lucaro was reconsecrated as Anternia, a realm for all Anter people, whether they liked it or not. Back home, the assembly was becoming divided. A strong faction of merchants led by a younger man named Fernan Maior questioned Rikar's commitment to the Republic. They accused him of conspiring to fill the assembly with loyalists, and questioned his trust in a council of advisors which was composed almost entirely out of self-proclaimed fortune-tellers and seers, perhaps attempting to appease the merchants, or perhaps to just stroke his own ego. Rikar personally led a military expedition across the sea, establishing a fortified port near Turbinian lands. A battle was waged against local pirate bands who operated in the area, but they could manage only token resistance once the Anternian infantry landed on the shores and began to raise the small fishing villages of the area, corralling the people into the new city and even hiring many of the pirates as mercenary sailors. Rikar's port would become Pireta, mirroring Lakia, a similar Turbinian port east of Anternia. Pireta granted Anternians more influence over a trade in the straits, and a place from which to combat any further pirates, a valuable economic asset to the merchant families. Relations between the Turbinian and Anternian republics quickly began to deteriorate, and tensions flared between the Great Assembly and the Arms Assembly. Turbinians saw the colony as an attempt to undermine their power. The Anternian merchants felt that a new trading port was of little use if it angered the largest trade partner in the region. Few Turbinian merchants were coming to Pireta, and it was cheaper to just dock in Turbinian ports and sell directly. Many commanders privately spoke of how Rikar's expedition hadn't gone far enough. They should have marched east into Turbinia itself. 10 years after the founding of Pireta, Rikar claimed one of his seers had a vision. Trade from Pireta will soon cease entirely if immediate action wasn't taken. He requested to travel south with the 3rd Legion by sea, a force large enough to invade Turbinia, but was outvoted. Days later, news arrived of the blockade of Pireta. A fleet of Turbinian ships blocked any Anternian vessels from arriving. Whatever trade had flowed through the city would flow no longer. Fearing the Turbinian navy, the assembly chose not to act, letting the city fend for itself, while also refusing to speak with Turbinian diplomats. It was not long after that war came to Anternia. The Turbinian Republic, under the command of Yapush Marshke, a former admiral turned merchant turned politician, sent one final diplomat to deliver a letter to the assembly. It simply read, "War." The Anternian fleet would meet the Turbinian navy at the first battle of the Strait of Gaiwo. But the Anternians were outnumbered and outmatched. Turbinian marines swarmed aboard the Anternian vessels by the thousands, as others were destroyed by mighty bronze rams. For every 2 ships which had departed the Anternian ports to join the fleets, only 1 came back. The Anternians were forced to agree to a humiliating treaty. Their favorable trade deals removed their navy kneecapped, and Pireta subsumed under Turbinian rule. The assembly was in chaos. One powerful merchant in Manora, Ortiz Sore, accompanied by Minkianaja, Veriko Larata, and hundreds of migrants and soldiers, departed Anternia entirely. They arrived in the land of Oikia, described by Larata as
a land of colorful savages who have their women ruled due to sheer logistical laziness.
Contrary to Larata's dismissiveness, the local Falochian tribes put up staunch resistance, though some would eventually fall to the invaders, as Sore and the immigrants would found the city of Vitoria, free from the Anternian rule and thus free from Turbinian trade restrictions. But back home, few others had sheer funds needed to simply replicate this endeavor, though similarly extreme proposals became common in the assembly, as debate raged for weeks on what could be done.
Damn the Turbinians. We have the forests. We need to rebuild the fleet bigger, stronger than before. This republic was built on trade and it will die without it. We cannot just stand by, humiliated by barbarians.
Exactly. Without the Turbinian market, our business will fail.
Well, that fleet is no use.
Even if we couldn't make more ships, the Durbinians can make them faster, better. We need to...
Oh, what now, eh? Join Ortes of gallivanting with the queens of the East? Look how much land we have taken, just in the last few decades. Trade is for the city-states. My estates more than sustain themselves on local material. You merchants just have to accept the future is in agriculture, not pottery or whatever it is you overcharge people for down there. Accept a little less coin. Just move on.
Why? That is the most ignorant. I cannot fathom where I would even begin correcting you.
Cease your bickering. The West is open to us. Forget the South and we can have victory nonetheless.
South lies civilization. All that lies to the west is barbarism.
We need more funds for the road.
Gold in circulation. Control the trade. We don't need the Durbinians.
There can be no...
Ah, senators. How goes the latest debate? I thought this much. This assembly, nay, this republic is rotted.
Senator, please.
It is! It is rotted, senators. It is decayed. But this is not the fate of the Anternian people. Were I as you are, I could perhaps be swayed to be content with our current state of affairs. To let our wounds fester. To allow that septic curse to seep into the blood of our realm and make this land a fetid shadow, withering under the radiant light of what it could have been. Cursed for all eternity. A carcass laid bare in the field for the carrion birds and the hyenas to pick at and devour. But I, senators, I will not stand idly by and watch our good country be reduced to ash. I am he who has the resolve as resolute and eternal as the very stars in the sky. My will is sown into the great firmament by the skeins of fate. The stars, they speak their divine will. They speak not of ordinary men, of flesh, of blood. They speak of a great spirit. My spirit. Good friends, heed my words. This country's wounds run deep. There is no hope but to excise what cannot be salvaged. That which creates the necrotic curse that spreads further. Cast it out! Senators, would you not also cut off a finger that has betrayed you so? But here, it is divine will. Were we to excise this stain, what will happen? A new appendage will grow, regenerated anew, hale and strong. It will reclaim the glory of the past and create triumphs of the future. Not a hint of failure in sight.
You would be crowned king?
No. I would not have you fawning before my feet. But I will lead. Fate guiding my hands. I will lead. This assembly has failed. In its founding days, it swore to defend this city. And for a time, a great time, it succeeded. But he who believes it is still succeeding in this day is blind. Or worse, a saboteur. What Lucero needs is not a bickering assembly, but a unified will. A singular will. That will, I tell you, senators, that will is my will. I challenge you, senators. I challenge you lot. Name me any other man who could be the medicine that this realm needs. Find me him, and I will without second thought or question swear my loyalty and follow him with a cloth wrapped about my eyes. But among all those you or I have ever met, there has only ever been one. And you, my friends, you would be fools to deny him his heaven-sent destiny.
Rikar became the first Anternian emperor in 75 XY. The first historians to write it would credit this rise almost entirely to his speech of regeneration, but the death of the Republic was a far more well-planned move. Deals had been struck. Rikar maintained family ties to several merchants, oversaw his own large estate as a nobleman, and had his army stationed outside of Lucero, just in case a bit more persuasiveness was needed. Shortly after his coronation, Rikar forcibly put down an attempted Republican coup, using their failure as further proof of the Republic's failures, and the brutal execution of the conspirators as a warning against further uprisings. With this power base secure, Rikar's next act as emperor was to lead the Anternian army once more to war, over land where he knew it best. He had promised the nobility and his loyalists in the army large grants of land in Sidoasia, and he would deliver. To remaining dissenters, those who still questioned why Sidoasia, those who asked why not build a new fleet and face Turbinia, Rikar famously replied,
Fire will not defeat fire. Rather, we must use water.
This sentiment seemed to sway the elite of Anternia. The riches of Sidoasia, both new lands for the nobility to rule over, and the access that land had to new trade routes running north, could supplant the need for Turbinian trade. Anternia had found a way to use her army to defeat the Turbinian navy. Within just a few weeks of his ascension, Rikar began to raise his armies and marched west into a new war. While Rikar drew up the strategy for the invasion, splitting the army into 4 smaller forces, the general under him handled most of the actual fighting. The newly crowned emperor took to the field only on the advice of his growing entourage of sages, which increasingly included priests and shamans of foreign gods. To the common soldiers of the army, Rikar was a hero, a man on a sure path of destiny who would bring victory wherever he arrived. To many in the nobility, though, he was becoming dangerously soft, a veritable barbarian sympathizer using the campaign in Sidoasia as an excuse to avoid confronting Turbinia. The campaigns in Sidoasia lasted many years, but when finally completed, the Anternian Empire had nearly doubled in size. What had been a single city-state a generation before now stretched across the majority of the southern coast of Fazar. But for all his talks of destiny and divine will, Rikar was a mortal man. After 25 years as Unagya and 26 as emperor, Ruiu Rikar died at the age of 75.
Rikar's rule was needed for the war, but the war is won. We should return to the old ways. We don't need a figurehead.
I must respectfully disagree. Ruiu shows the advantages of firm, stalwart leadership. True, he put his power towards war, but a successor need not. Central leadership can carry us to glory in peace just as well. I nominate Fernan Maior to succeed Rikar, a ruler just as firm, but far more balanced.
Why, my dear friend, I thank you for your confidence. It is true, I perhaps lack some of Ruiu's flair. Certainly, I am not so unshakably sure of my personal victory, but I do believe in Anternia, and I believe in you all to choose sense, reason over pure charisma, a mind over a fist. Under my leadership, we can make this land better, good enough to right the wrongs of the past, good enough to defeat Turbinia with time.
I could see the sense in that.
Yes. Wise leadership is what we need.
A new Rikar!
Maior had spent the latter half of Rikar's reign making deals to ensure his place as the next ruler of Anternia. He had allies with politicians and officers, bribed those who needed a little more of encouragement, and more to carefully orchestrate his own ascension, leading to his official crowning in the year 101. Here, he took the name Fernan Maior Rikar, solidifying his position as heir to the Emperor's legacy. Maior rallied the realm against the idea of the war basket, saying that Ruiu had put everything into the army, the very strategic failure that had allowed Turbania to humiliate them all those years ago. The new Rikar favored a more thorough bureaucracy, a means to put the taxes collected off the nobility and merchants to the most efficient and varied use possible. Maior was a builder of public works, of roads, of ports, a softer touch who favored private negotiation to daring speeches and threats of force. Slowly but surely the Anternian fleet was built up. Cities were fortified, the vast army levied by his predecessor distributed fiefs of land carved out of his predecessor's conquests. Maior may have lacked charisma, but he got the job done. When the Asdernians came down from the northern desert to raid and pillage, He rose to the defense of the realm, driving them back where they came, or west into the Urbanian holdings on the coast. And when the time finally came, when his preparations were done, Maior launched the Second Urbanian War. The rebuilt Anternian navy guarded the coasts, battling off Urbanian advances in a series of close battles, as the army lay siege to Lakia. After 2 years, the city fell, and the Urbanian holdings on the Anternian coast were annexed. With careful patience, Maior was able to finally get revenge for the loss of Pireta. The new Rikar sent the soldiers back to their fields, unfortunately just in time for a new, larger Asdarian army to descend from the north. Maior was unable to regroup the soldiers, and much of the Anternian countryside was thoroughly looted, and several cities and towns sacked or razed. With pressure from the military, Maior raised a new army and marched north, annexing more land for the Empire, and inadvertently causing an economic crisis as funds were sucked into subjugating the northern territory. After the year 120, the assembly had fractured into 2 distinct factions. The most seats were held by merchant families and their allies who called for liberty and freedom, while the emperor was backed by the largest landowners and the military, who called for centralization and authority. 4 years later, this division escalated into civil war, as the anti-imperial senators rose up and amassed forces to restore the republic. But they were no match for the experienced officers backing Maior. Within just 8 months, the assembly forces were crippled, and their families stripped of their wealth and power, many executed or enslaved. In the months following the war, Maior disbanded the Great Assembly, forming a new advisory assembly and bringing the Arms Assembly back as an equal yet distinct part in electing the Emperor. Just in time, as Maior would die of old age only a few months later, at the age of 86. Maior's death saw a smooth transition to his successor, Rikar Pietron Enax, a cousin of the recently dead Emperor. Pietron is known primarily for the centralization of imperial authority during his rule, and being the first emperor to be born after the end of the Republic. The twin assemblies, already weakened under Maior, lost more power. The writing and enforcement of laws was increasingly handled by appointed bureaucrats. The Arms Assembly came to serve as little more than a way to pass orders down from the Emperor. Barring occasional raids from the north, Pietron's rule was relatively peaceful, a time of plenty for Anternia and its people, as his hand-picked man ran the government. Beginning in one defensive campaign against the raiders around the year 152, Pietron would take a liking to a young officer in the military. This officer, a common-born man named Ruiu, would be showered with gifts, fast-tracked to a promotion, and given an education by Anternia's greatest minds. As Pietron grew older, Ruiu began to reside in the Imperial Palace, taking on many of his Pinter's duties. He was certainly the Emperor's close confidant, and according to the court rumors of the day, 4 more besides. In 164, when Pietron died in a hunting accident at the age of 78, a dispute broke out over his estate. The man had never taken a wife and had fathered no children. Ruiu stepped forth, taking on his predecessor's name and declaring himself the spiritual son of Pietron. Mere days later, the assembly packed with Pietron's loyalists. Ruiu Enax was quickly elected as the next emperor, crowned under the light of a comet. Ruiu began his rule at just 33, and by the end of his long reign, he would be remembered as the greatest ruler in Anternian history. But while Ruiu would bring Anternia to its peak, within a generation of his death, Anternia would be no more.